Okay, we're in part 4 of balance, and let's review really quickly. We said there are 3 laws to physical balance, and we're comparing and contrasting those 3 laws of physical balance to financial balance. And the first law of physical balance is you have to have a reference point. Whenever you're balancing something, there's some place you should always keep your eye. That's how you balance. And we said in the very first part of this series, the thing you have to keep your eye on is where your money is going. That's right. You need to have a system where you know where your money's going. You need to be knowing where all your money's. That's right. So some of you started writing all those down. Some of you begin using Quicken. But you need a system as a single person or as a couple to always know where your money's going. The thing you never, ever take your eye off is where is all my money going? You need to know where all your money goes. Then the third law of physical balance is you have to have a clear objective. That is, what am I trying to do? Well, I'm trying to keep this pole vertical. Whenever you're balancing something, there's a clear objective. And in the second part of this series, we talked about what our objective is when it comes to money. When it comes to all of your money and all of your possessions, what in the heck are you trying to do? I mean, what's the point? Is it just save all you can save, or give all you can give, or spend all you can spend, or acquire all you can acquire? I mean, what is it all about? And as we opened up the Old Testament and the New Testament, we discovered that our objective when it comes to all of our money and all of our possessions is very simple. It's honor God. Honor God. What I'm trying to do as I manage money and manage wealth and manage possessions, at the end of the day, the question is, how can I best honor God with everything? Not a percentage. How do I honor God with everything I have, everything that comes my way? And as we begin to ask that question, we find ourselves freed up as it comes to possessions. And we no longer find ourselves serving our stuff, but we serve our God by simply using our stuff responsibly. And then we began with the second law of physical balance, which is constant corrections. Constant corrections. My left hand is making constant corrections in order to keep this balance. And we began talking about constant corrections. And the first one we talked about was debt. That in order to be balanced in your personal finances, you've got to rethink debt, especially consumer debt. And one of the constant corrections, or one of the corrections that many of us have begun to make and that you need to continue to make, is to get the heck out of debt. You got to get out of debt. Because as we discovered, the borrower is always a what? That's right. The borrower is always a slave to the lender. And you don't want somebody else telling you what to do. And when you finance that car, they didn't tell you. Now, by the way, when you sign this, we become your master. They forgot to tell you that part. And when you signed on to that mortgage that was just a little bit beyond what you should have signed on to, nobody said, and by the way, the mortgage company becomes your master. And Visa and American Express, which are all wonderful companies that provide a wonderful service in our country, they forgot to tell us, oh, by the way, you carry a balance, and guess what? We get to be your master. And we don't sell ourselves into slavery. We consume ourselves into financial slavery. So if you're going to be balanced, you have got to get out of debt. We said, you know what? Everything belongs to God. Everything comes from God. Everything's distributed and dispersed by God. So to be financially balanced, we need to honor God. And you can't honor God when you've got God on one side saying, here's what I want you to do, and Visa on the other side saying, yeah, but let me tell you what you have to do. And God nudges you and says, hey, I've got an idea. And American Express says, yeah, but I have a responsibility. And you have a responsibility to me. So you got to get out of debt. And in your workbook that many of you have purchased, and some of you are downloading the PDFs from balanceonline.org. That's balanceonline.org. You've begun to create a worksheet where you're going to begin to get out of debt. Okay? Today, we're going to talk about another constant correction. Today, for a few minutes, I want to talk about all your extra money. Okay? You know what I mean by extra money? How many of you have extra money? Andy, I think you got the wrong audience. Not only do you have the wrong audience, this is the wrong time because there's no such thing as extra money. But for the next few minutes, I want to convince you that you have extra money and that what you do and what you choose to do with your extra money is an indication as to who you belong to. That what you do with your extra money is an indication of something you believe that you may not know that you believe, that Jesus talks about very specifically. And it's just a brilliant insight. And it's one of those things that when I read the Bible, I think, wow, who could have come up with this? Only God could have. Wow. So it's just one of those incredible things. And Jesus says, as we're going to see, that the way you manage your extra money is a reflection of something in your heart. So for a few minutes, I want to talk about your extra money. Now, if you think, well, you're not talking about me because I don't have any extra money, you do. The problem is all of our extra money either gets consumed or saved so we can consume it later. We either consume it now or we put it in the bank so we can consume it later. And then when somebody says, what about your extra money? You say, I don't have any extra money. But if you're living indoors and you're eating and you got your kids eating and living indoors, anything beyond that, it's kind of extra. So I want to talk about what you do with your extra money. If you went to a movie in the past couple of weeks, you had a little extra money, didn't you? If you have a bad Starbucks habit like I do, you got a little extra cash, don't you? You got some extra money. If you got a cell phone, a little extra money. If you have a car, you have a car? Do you know what percentage of the world's population that puts you in? I mean, you're in a very exclusive group. If you have a car, some of you have more than a car. You have like 2 cars. Some of you have 3 cars. Like that's extra money. You live in your own house. You're kidding me? You don't rent. You like own a home. See all that? That's just gravy. That's what you did with some of your extra money. You were able to save up so much extra money you could put a down payment on a house. That's unbelievable. That's a good job. Way to go. That's what you did with some of your extra money, right? Have you ever traded something in that worked for another one kind of like it that was just newer? Like you already had one and it worked? In fact, it worked so well, somebody said, I'm going to buy that from you so I can use it because it works just fine, but you wanted another one? Generally, that's a car, but it's other things as well. That's extra money. Hey, ever had a garage sale? What was all that stuff? That was your extra stuff, right? We're going to take our extra stuff out of the basement and we're going to sell it. Well, where did it come from? Well, it's extra. Don't you need it? Not really. We didn't even know we had it till we got it out of the attic in the garage, right? That was all of our extra stuff, right? Extra. What about this? How many of you have one of those things in the bottom of your sink and you you flip a switch somewhere on your countertop and it goes like, what do you call that? The what? The garbage disposal. How many of you have ever actually put garbage in there? We haven't. You know what we put in there? What do you put in your garbage disposal? Food. And you know where the food came from? Generally, right off the plate that you just finished eating off of. You took your extra food and you put it in the ground. We have a septic system, and we have like a septic field. Because we live out where there's no sewer. We have a septic field just for our garbage disposal because they made us do that when we built our house. And you know what was amazing? This summer, when all the grass, we have fescue, and it was like deader than deader because we don't run a sprinkler and we don't put a sign out there that says irrigated by a well, even though we don't have a well, okay? We didn't do that. Or irrigated by pond. People are like, there's no pond out there. So, we play by the rules. So when I say our grass was dead, I'm talking about we could have baled it and sold it for hay. It looked awful, this big giant front yard of just brown, except over to the right by the basement, there's this patch of grass that is so green. It was so green. It's because we were feeding it. We're putting the food off our plate in the disposal and went down there and fed the yard. We had this patch of green grass. Our grass was eating better than some people in the world because we had extra food. Anybody want to eat this extra food? Let's feed it to the ground, right? Now, we don't think in these terms. That's why I want to kind of just stir you up a little bit. We have extra. The question is, if you're going to be balanced, you got to figure out what you're going to do and what you ought to do with your extra. Now, the only time in your life and the only time in my life when I feel like I have extra is when I'm around people who have a lot less than I do. When I'm around people like a third world country, or we've done several mission trips, we've gotten involved with serving the working poor here in our own community and in our communities around Atlanta. When I'm around people that have a lot less than I do, suddenly I'm aware of how blessed I am and how fortunate I am and what that really means when I say I'm so blessed and I'm so fortunate. And I tell my kids, aren't we blessed and aren't we fortunate? What I'm really saying is we have extra. We have extra. These people are eating and living indoors, and we're eating and living indoors, but we're eating and living indoors at a much higher standard of living than they are because we have so much more. We have extra. The only time we're aware that we have extra generally is when we're around people who have a lot less than us. Every once in a while, we go down to the Gulf to vacation. Sandra and I will take a trip, just the two of us, for a few days. And a couple years ago, 2 years ago, we were down at around Destin, and we drove through watercolors. Do you know where watercolors is? It's amazing. There's like all these extra houses. They're gorgeous. They're unbelievable. I hope you have one. I hope you'll invite us. I'm not against people with extra houses, but we're walking through this neighborhood. It was in the fall, so it wasn't vacation season. We're walking through this neighborhood of these gorgeous houses, and there's no one around. Tumbleweed blew across at one point. There's like no one around, not a single car. These are all somebody's extra houses they have down there just in case they need an extra house. So all these extra houses. And when I was walking through watercolors, it's so beautiful. It's a perfect day. And we're walking through there looking at these just gorgeous house after gorgeous house. Nobody's there. I never thought one time, I wonder why I have so much extra. I thought, I wonder why I don't have one of these. Because our culture does to me what it does to you. Our culture gets us laser focused on what we don't have. And because there's so much that we don't have, we assume since we don't have what we think we ought to have, we don't have any extra. But the truth is, most of us, not all of us, I mean, these are some difficult times. Most of us have had, do have, or will have some extra. And this is important. And what you choose to do with your extra is a reflection of your heart. And what you do and choose to do with your extra is a reflection of where you stand in a relationship to your Father in heaven. And what you do with your extra and what I do with my extra is an indication as to who or what controls my heart. Now today, we're going to look at a teaching from Scripture where Jesus addressed specifically the issue of the extra. And he was talking to a very poor community. And he was talking to a group of people that were taxed and triple taxed to death. And he was talking to people that felt like they were in captivity to a foreign government. And yet he still had the audacity to say, even as difficult as things are for you, to his original audience, you've got to consider what you do and how you view and how you manage your extra. So if you have your Bible and you want to follow along, we're in the book of Luke, and we're in chapter 12, and we're going to begin with verse 16. But let me kind of set this up for you. Luke 12, verse 16 is where we begin. We talked about this parable about a year and a half ago. So if this sounds familiar and you were here a year and a half ago, we talked about this within a different context. But here's how Jesus sets up the story. And here's kind of a blast. You know, this is sort of a big idea. And this is that brilliant statement that when you hear it, you think, well, that doesn't apply to me. But Jesus was so great about making big statements that everybody thought were irrelevant. Then he would tell a parable, and people walked away thinking, I think that was about me. I think I was in the parable. I think I was a part of that story. And here's the statement he makes as he begins this parable. He begins this way. He says this: a man or a woman or a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. A man or a woman or, anyone's, our lives, he says, your lives do not consist, your life is not equivalent to, your life is not the same as the abundance of your possessions. And, we hear that, we go, okay, my life does not consist of the abundance of my possessions. Well, I know that. I mean, I know there's more to life than stuff. Why would you even bother saying that? Who in the world thinks that their life consists of the abundance of their possessions? But, recently we've heard about some people who thought they were. Because haven't recently we heard about some people who lost more money than we'll ever make and they killed themselves? And you hear about these suicides over people who've lost wealth and you think, what happened? They thought their life consisted in the abundance of their possessions, and when their stuff went away, they didn't think they had anything to live for. And Jesus teaches, this is so subtle, that for all of us with extra, with movie habits and gadget habits and more than one car, and we own our own home and we're thinking about upgrading, and even in difficult times, we have extra. He says, if you have extra, you run the risk. So pay attention. You run the risk of, in a practical way, living as if your life consisted in the abundance of your possessions, which means this, that you think that everything that comes your way is the equivalent of air and food and water, that you've got to consume it or save it to consume later. You've got to consume it now or save it to consume later. You plan to use all of it up for you. If you plan to use everything that comes your way up for you now, you later, or your kids later, that's like treating money and stuff like air and water and food. I've got to have it to live. That's what it means to live, as if your life consists, your total of your life consists in the abundance of your possessions. Logically, we know there's more to life than stuff, but practically, many of us live as if life consists, is equal to, is the same as what we have, what we will have, what we manage, and what we control. And Jesus teaches you can determine whether or not you're living that way by keeping your eye on what you do with your extra stuff. Now, this is a powerful principle and a powerful parable. Let me read it to you and we'll get through this pretty quick. Luke chapter 12, we'll begin with verse 16. So after he makes that big, broad statement, he says this. And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. So the guy's already rich, and now he has even more wealth because the ground of a rich man produced a good crop. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have extra. Oh my gosh, I have all this extra. What am I going to do with my extra? Verse 17. Thought, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. I have no place to store my extra crops. I have extra stuff, and I don't know what to do with it. My basement's full. My attic's full. My barns are full. I have so much extra. It's all sitting outside. What shall I do with my extra? Now, you've never had that concern. And Jesus is doing a parable, which means he's going to exaggerate things for the sake of making a point. Verse 18, then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns. I'll tear down my house. I'll dig up my basement. I'll redo my attic. I'll tear down my barns and I'll build bigger ones. And there I will store all my, insert the word, extra grain and my goods. So, oh my gosh, I had an emergency. I had all these extra crops. I didn't know what to do with them. So I know what I'll do. I'll build some bigger barns to store all my extra stuff. And then I'll say to myself, you have plenty of extra good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Which is really a great plan. I mean, if you can create barns big enough to hold all your extra stuff, then wow, you're set for life. You have enough to consume now. And you have plenty to consume later. And you have plenty to make sure your kids have enough to consume later. Because after all, isn't all the extra for us? Isn't the point of having extra that I have extra and that I can take care of myself and my children's selves and their grandchildren's selves, and maybe I can have trust funds and take care of 4 or 5 generations of Stanleys because of all of my extra? Isn't God good? I have been so incredibly blessed. I'm going to build some bigger barns. It's an exaggeration. It's a big story. What is he going to do with all of that extra? Verse 20. But God said to him, you fool. Now, at this point in the story, I think Jesus' audience was confused. They're like, wait a minute. He's not a fool. He's blessed of God. In this culture, if you were wealthy, clearly you were living in God's favor. You had the favor of God. Now, we have churches and church communities that teach that now, that if you have a lot of stuff, God's blessed you. If you're in poverty, you just need to have more faith. That's not in the Bible. That's not even hinted at in the Bible. That's bad theology, and just in case you haven't been paying attention, it doesn't work. Some of the wealthiest people in America are pagans. Some of the wealthiest people in the world are atheists. Why did they get so blessed? And why do you, as a nice, good Christian man or woman, why do you struggle? It's because what you have is not a reflection of God's blessing necessarily. That's just not true. And so here's this guy who does, and he's a farmer. See, this is in this agricultural society, they understood that if the ground produced a bountiful crop, clearly God sent the rain and God sends the sun and God, it's God that blessed him. So God has blessed this rich man. He's already rich and blessed by God. Now he's been blessed with extra, and now he's wise enough to figure out how to secure his future and his family's future for years to come. And Jesus says that God says, you fool. Clearly there's a disconnect. Maybe God looks at you and he says, you fool. I'm not a fool. I'm taking care of myself and my family, and I got it all worked out, and I got out of the stock market just in time, and everybody thinks I'm brilliant. Maybe Jesus says, you fool. You're going, I'm not a fool. People ask me to speak at breakfast and lunches and dinners to tell them how I did it. People think that people are jealous of me because I've so secured my future. I'm bulletproof. I beat the system, or I'm figuring out a way to do it. Jesus says, no. God says, you fool. Why am I a fool? Because you don't understand why you have extra. And even though from the world's perspective, your extra makes you someone that people envy, the truth is you have bought the lie that your life consists in the abundance of your possessions, which means you serve your stuff. And you are in just a different form of slavery than the person that's enslaved by the person or the organization they owe money to. You have bought the lie. And Jesus says, you fool. And Jesus doesn't call him a fool. God doesn't call him a fool because he's rich. God calls him a fool because he doesn't understand why he had so much extra. He thought it was all for his current consumption or his future consumption. Now, I'm not trying to make anybody angry, but I am trying to get you to think. If your thoughts about your possessions and your income are, it's for me to figure out how to secure my future, then you don't understand why you have extra. And that's true of you if you just have enough extra to have a coffee habit and a movie habit and a couple vacation a year habit. Or if you have so much extra, you literally have to set up bank accounts and trust funds to figure out what to do with all of your extra. So listen to how the story goes if you haven't heard this before. But God said to him, you fool, this very night, your life will be demanded from you. You are out of time, even though you're not out of money. You are out of time, even though you're not out of money. Most of us who live in America will run out of time before we run out of money. Why? Because we are good at securing our futures. Our companies help us secure our future. 401ks help us secure our future. We're pretty good and getting better at saving to secure our future. Most Americans, because of family support or because they've been good investors and wise, most of us listening to this message, we are going to run out of time before we run out of money. And Jesus says, your life is demanded of you. Then he asks a question that we should all think about. Then, he says, who will get, let me insert the words, the extra? Who will get the extra? Who will get what you have prepared for yourself? You have assumed that all the extra is for yourself. So now, who is going to get all the extra you prepared for yourself? And the answer is somebody else. But not because he was generous, but because he was dead. He didn't give it. He left it. Verse 21. Now Jesus pulls out of the parable and he addresses his audience and he addresses us directly. This is how it will be. Pause. This is how it will be. This thing that I've just described and illustrated, this is how it will be. What is this? Total loss. Total loss. Complete loss. Everything was left behind with no credit except, wow, wasn't he lucky that his crops came in so bountifully in the last season of his life. This complete and total loss. Verse 21. This is how it will be for anyone who stores up things for himself, herself, themselves, but is not rich toward God. And the implication of this verse, and as you look at the ministry and the life of Jesus, Jesus is not teaching against preparing for the future financially. He's not teaching that. We know that because of his friends. What Jesus is saying here is this is how it will be for anyone who thinks everything that comes their way is for their consumption now or later and forgets to be rich towards God. That forgets that everything that comes our way isn't for our consumption either now or later or for our children. That there's another component. That there is an adjustment, there's a correction that we need to make in our thinking and in the way that we manage our money. He says, I don't want you to simply be rich towards you. You are rich towards you because of the talent and the abilities and the opportunities and the hard work that I've allowed you to be a part of. You are rich towards you because you've worked hard. You're rich towards you because you live in this incredible country. You are rich towards you because you've been careful and disciplined. You're rich towards you because I brought opportunities and gave you talents. You're rich towards you, and congratulations. But don't forget to be rich toward God. Because if you're only rich towards you, you are living as if everything that comes my way is absolutely necessary for my life. It's like air. It's like food. It's like shelter. I've got to have it all now, and I got to make sure it's all there later. He says that's how it is for anyone who lives their life, as if it's all for themselves and are not rich towards God. What in the world does it mean to be rich towards God? A few verses later, he defines that in a way that is absolutely clear. Verse 33, if you're following along, you can skip down. What does it look like to be rich towards God? Sell your possessions. All of them? Nope. We know that from the way that Jesus lived. Not all of them. Sell some possessions. Sell the possessions that you don't need. Sell some of that extra stuff and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven. That somehow in God's economy, when I take some of my extra and make sure that when I have more than what I need, I give to those who are in need. When I take some of my extra to make sure somebody else has enough, that's treasure in heaven. That's what it means to be rich towards God. When I am rich toward the people that are important to God, it's in the same way. In that way, I've been rich towards God. Treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, and this is the verse that started our whole conversation 4 weeks ago. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The fella in the parable, his heart was completely tied to this life. So when this life ended, when he breathed his last breath, total loss. And Jesus says that's how it'll be for anybody. Rich, kind of rich, middle class, upper middle class, wherever you are. That's how it'll be for anybody that thinks all their extra is for their consumption now or their consumption later. If you think that way, or if I were to look at your checking account and your Visa statement and the way you spend your money and assume that you're living that way, you are out of balance and you need to make a correction. And you need to rethink what you are doing with the extra. And if you don't think you have any extra, here's why. For most of us, not all, but for the vast majority, the reason we don't think we have any extra is because it seems like everything I have is absolutely necessary for my personal consumption, or I can't make it. I can't live. That's what it means to live and to believe that the abundance of your stuff is the equivalent of your life. Now, here's what I want you to do. This is going to take a little time. Some of you will enjoy this because you love forms and figuring things out and calculators. Some of you will just glaze over. But I dare you to do this, whether you're a Christian, an atheist, an agnostic, trying to figure it out somewhere in between. I dare you, I just challenge you to do this. In your workbook, we have a page, and you can download this or you can make it up. You don't need our form. I want to challenge you this week to figure out how many dollars you gave away this past year. I want you to total up the number of dollars of your charitable contribution. Now, let me tell you what. Most of you think you're more generous than you are. You've deceived yourself. Because you know what? When you give $100, I'm giving $100 a lot of money. It's all in percentages. We're going to see in the next couple of weeks, and you read the Bible for yourself, God thinks percentages. He is not impressed by the numbers of dollars that you give or save. He's not impressed. He owns everything. You can't impress God. So we're impressed by, I gave $1,000. You know what I could have done with that $1,000? Guys, I'm not impressed with your $1,000. It's all about percentage. So here's what I want to challenge you to do. We have a little form to help you out. I double dog dare you, challenge you, call you chicken if you want. Sit down and figure out, now this is important, add up how many dollars that you gave away. Those are the extra ones. You had some extra and you decided to give it away. Come on, add up. Here's how many dollars I gave away, and then I dare you to figure out what percentage of your income that was last year. I dare you. And I hope you're embarrassed. The average American gives away about 2%. politicians give the least. It's absolutely ridiculous how little money politicians give. And then when they get elected to office, they give a little bit more. I've never even heard about an elected official that gave 10%. They may be out there, haven't seen that yet. Never had a president I know in my lifetime as they pull out tax. They just don't. And yet we think we're generous people. I dare you. I dare you. Add it up and then ask the question, not how many dollars did I give? What percentage of my overall income did I put outside of what I'm going to consume for me now or later? And then I dare you to take this next step, and it's all right here. I want to challenge you to set not a dollar goal, but a percentage goal. I want to dare you to choose ahead of time this year a percentage of your extra, a percentage of your income rather, to give away. And if you've never been a percentage giver, I'm telling you, this changes the game. This forces you to rethink your lifestyle. This forces you to rethink your selfishness. This forces you to face your greed. I dare you to pick a percentage, and I dare you for the next 12 months to give it. You say, Andy, you're trying to get our money. Don't give it here. Here's the good news. We're going to survive without your money. You know why? Because there are enough people who believe in what we're doing as a church, they're going to give. So don't give it here. I'm not trying to get your money. This isn't anything about us. This isn't for me. This is for you. I dare you to find out what percentage of your money you gave last year, and I dare you to pick a percentage and give it this next year. Here's what will happen. It will force you to deal with this question. Am I living as if what I have equals my life? And if it is difficult for you to write larger than normal checks, even though you know you can, and even though you have the extra, and if it forces you to think, oh, but I was going to put that away because what if? In that tension, you'll discover something about yourself. And you know something? If you will force yourself to become a percentage giver, and if you don't have any income this year, hey, you don't have to give anything. If you will force yourself to become a percentage, I'm not choosing a dollar amount. I'm not going to look back and go, wasn't I generous? I'm going to choose it up front. I'm pre-deciding, ready? I'm pre-deciding to be rich towards God, not just rich towards me. That is an adjustment I know that most Americans need to make. I think most Christians need to make, which means probably most of us need to rethink and make. Here's the takeaway of this message for me, and I wrote this down. I keep these cards in front of me sometimes just so I don't forget what I've taught. This is what I wrote. What I do with my extra is an indication of whether or not I believe. What I do with my extra is an indication of whether or not I believe that my life consists in the abundance of my possessions. If you want to know if I think my life consists in the abundance of my possessions, don't let me convince you with my fancy words. Ask me, Andy, what do you do with your extra? And are you consuming it now or planning to consume it later? If so, Andy, you're living as if money is air. You're living as if money is food. You've got to have it all to survive. But if I am willing to be rich and decide ahead of time to be rich toward God, then I am freeing myself, as you will free yourself, of this lie that is so easy to believe in this kind of economy, in this kind of country, and at this time in our life when we're feeling the economic pressure. And you know where we're feeling the pressure, most of us? The pressure most of us are feeling is not because we can't eat and live indoors. It's because we have less extra than we used to have. That's where we're feeling it because we've been so blessed. So here's the challenge. Will you make this correction? Will you pre-decide to be rich toward God? Here's what's going to happen. As you force yourself and as you discipline yourself to say, I'm not going to live as if I've got to have it all to survive. And as you begin to be more generous and to be generous ahead of time by choosing a percentage and not waiting for the hat to be passed in your office because you're giving to the United Way or something. Or, every Sunday you come here and you open up that wallet, put in a 20 and 20 going in, 20 coming in, 20, I got 2 20s coming in for a landing, shake it. I know you don't do that, but I'm saying, here's what I'm saying. When you give cash that way, it is easy to think, look how generous I am. I'm just challenging you to pick a percentage and then decide where it's going to go and give it first. Because in doing so, you will have made a constant correction. You will be rich toward God, and you will have pried the fingers of greed And I know you don't think you're a greedy person. It's impossible to see greed in the mirror. Pride those fingers, it is. Pride, I mean, you see other things in the mirror, but you don't see greed. We just say, well, I'm cautious and I'm careful and I'm a planner. No, you're greedy. Jesus said that. Listen, I'm done. When you begin to live as a person who doesn't believe that I have to consume it all now or plan to consume it later, when you begin to be rich toward God, when you begin to give to those in need because you have more than you need, something happens in your heart. And here's what you're going to discover. You are going to have less peace. You're going to have more peace. And you're going to have less anxiety. Do you know who's not worried right now about our economy? The men and women, not all the rich people. I know plenty of rich people scared to death. The rich people lost the most, didn't they? They should have given it away. They wouldn't have lost it. I'm serious. I look at my own 401k and I thought, Sandra and I were talking about this. I wish we'd given more because you can't take away from me and I can't lose what I've already given. I'm so grateful that we're a generous family because I didn't lose any of that. It can't be taken away because we were taught as kids to be rich towards God. And I want that for you. You say, Andy, this is a terrible time for me to begin that. No, this is the best time to begin this. Because I'm telling you know who's not worried right now about the economy? The men and women who understand in their heart and understand in their lifestyle that my life does not consist in the abundance of my wealth. You can take all my stuff. You can take all my wealth. I still have what's important. And you learn that by pre-decided generosity. Your life does not consist in the abundance of your wealth. So stop living that way. Your life, you know this, your life does not consist in the abundance of your stuff. So quit living like it does. Your Heavenly Father is going to take care of you. So stop living as if it's all up to you. Your life does not consist in the abundance of your wealth. It's not like air. It's not like food. It's not like water. So begin living as if it's simply the tool that God has allowed you to manage so that when you have a little more than you need, you can help those who are in need. And when you do, you'll be balanced. And when you do, you'll be free. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Jesus said it best. It couldn't be clearer. We couldn't be more grateful. Give us the courage to open our hands. Give us the courage to open our hearts. Set us free from the lie that it's for us now, and it's for us later. And just give us the courage to take bold steps and become the most generous generation during a time when everyone would say, how in the world could they be so generous when things seem to be so unsettled? Teach us to trust you. Set us free, set our hearts free. And I pray all of that in Jesus' name. Amen.